Hey everybody, it's me, Miss Denny, your favorite children's librarian. Thank you for joining me for another session of the weekly read. We have been reading Peter and Wendy, and if you missed the previous chapters, no worries, they're all right here on our YouTube page on the playlist, The Weekly Read, Peter and Wendy. And today we will be reading chapter 5 and 6. Chapter 5 is called The Island Come True. Here we go. Feeling that Peter was on his way back, the Neverland had woke again into life. We ought to use the pluperfect and say wakened, but woke is better and was always used by Peter. In his absence, things are usually quiet on the island. The fairies take an hour longer in the morning, the beasts attend to their young, the redskins feed heavily for 6 days and nights, and when pirates and lost boys meet, they merely bite their thumbs at each other. But with the coming of Peter, who hates lethargy, they are all underway again. If you put your ear to the ground now, you would hear the whole island seething with life. On this evening, the chief forces of the island were disposed as follows. The lost boys were out looking for Peter. The pirates were out looking for the lost boys. The redskins were out looking for pirates, and the red beasts were out looking for the redskins. They were going round and round the island, but they did not meet because they were all going at the same rate. All wanted blood except the boys, who liked it as a rule, but tonight were out to greet their captain. The boys on the island vary, of course, in numbers according as they get killed and so on. And when they seem to be growing up, which is against the rules, Peter thins them out. But at this time, there were 6 of them, counting the twins as 2. Let us pretend to lie here among the sugarcane and watch them as they steal in by single file, each with his hand on his dagger. They are forbidden by Peter to look in the least like him, and they wear the skins of bears slain by themselves, in which they are so round and furry that when they fall, they roll. They have therefore become very sure-footed. The first to pass is Toodles, not the least brave, but the most unfortunate of all that gallant band. He had been in fewer adventures than any of them, because the big things constantly happened just when he had stepped around the corner. All would be quiet. He would take the opportunity of going off to gather a few sticks for firewood, and then when he returned, the others would be sweeping up the blood. This ill luck had given him a gentle melancholy to his countenance, but instead of souring his nature, had sweetened it, so that he was quite the humblest of the boys. Poor kind Toodles, there is danger in the air for you tonight. Take care lest an adventure is now offered you, which, if accepted, will plunge you in deepest woe. Toodles, the fairy Tink, who is bent on mischief this night, is looking for a tool, and she thinks you the most easily tricked of the boys. Where Tinkerbell? Would that he could hear us, but we are not really on the island, and he passes by, biting his knuckles. Next comes Nibs, the gay and debonair, followed by Slightly, who cuts whistles out of the trees and dances ecstatically to his own tunes. Slightly is the most conceited of the boys. He thinks he remembers the days before he was lost, with their manners and customs, and this has given his nose an offensive tilt. Curly is fourth. He is a pickle, and so often has to deliver up his person when Peter said sternly, "Stand forth, the one who did this thing." That now at the command, he stands forth automatically, whether he has done it or not. Last come the twins, who cannot be described because we should be sure to be describing the wrong one. Peter never quite knew what twins were, and his band were not allowed to know anything he did not know. So these two were always vague about themselves and did their best to give satisfaction by keeping close together in an apologetic sort of way. The boys vanish in the gloom, and after a pause, but not a long pause, for things go briskly on the island, come the pirates on their track. We hear them before they are seen, and it is always the same dreadful song. Avast belay, yo-ho, heave to, a pirating we go, and if we're parted by a shot, we're sure to meet below. A more villainous looking lot never hung in the row on execution dock. Here, a little in advance, ever and again with his head to the ground listening, his great arms bare, pieces of 8 in his ears as ornaments, is the handsome Italian Cecco with his name in letters of blood on the back of the governor of the prison at Gao. That gigantic black behind him has had many names since he dropped the one with which dusky mothers still terrify their children on the banks of Guadalhormo. Here is Bill Jukes, every inch of him tattooed, the same Bill Jukes who got 6 dozen on the walrus from Flint before he would drop the bag of Mordors. And Cookson, said to be Black Murphy's brother, but this was never proved. And Gentleman Starkey, once an usher in a public school and still dainty in his ways of killing, and Skylights, Morgan's Skylights, and the Irish boatswain Smee, an oddly genial man who stabbed, so to speak, without offense, and was the only nonconformist in Hook's crew. And Noodler, whose hands were fixed on backwards, and Robt Mullins, and Alf Mason, and many other ruffian long known and feared on the Spanish Main. In the midst of them, the blackest and largest jewel in that dark setting, reclined James Hook, or as he wrote himself, Jazz Hook, of whom it is said he was the only man that the sea cook feared. He lay at his ease in a rough chariot drawn and propelled by his men, and instead of a right hand, he had the iron hook, with which ever and anon he encouraged them to increase their pace. As dogs, this terrible man treated and addressed them, and as dogs, they obeyed him. In person, he was cadaverous and black-avised, and his hair was dressed in long curls, which at a little distance looked like black candles and gave a singularly threatening expression to his handsome countenance. His eyes were of the blue of the forget-me-not and of a profound melancholy, save when he was plunging his hook into you, at which time 2 red spots appeared in them and lit up horribly. In manner, something of the grand seigneur still clung to him, so that he even ripped you up with an air, and I have been told that he was a raconteur of repute. I have never seen more sinister than when he was polite, which is probably the truest test of his breeding and the elegance of his diction. Even when he was swearing, no less than the distinction of his demeanor showed him one of a different cast from his crew. A man of indomitable courage, it is said of him that the only thing he shied at was the sight of his own blood, which was thick and of an unusual color. In dress, he somewhat aped the attire associated with the name of Charles II, having heard it said in some earlier period of his career that he bore a strange resemblance to the ill-fated Stuarts, and in his mouth he had a holder of his own contrivance, which enabled him to smoke 2 cigars at once. But undoubtedly the grimmest part of him was his iron claw. Let us now kill a pirate to show Hook's method. Skylights will do. As they pass, Skylights lurches clumsily against him, ruffling his lace collar. The hook shoots forth, there is a tearing sound and one screech, then the body is kicked aside and the pirates pass on. He has not even taken the cigars from his mouth. Such is the terrible man against whom Peter Pan is pitted. Which will win? On the trail of the pirates, stealing noiselessly down the warpath, which is not visible to inexperienced eyes, come the redskins, every one of them with his eyes peeled. They carry tomahawks and knives, and their naked bodies gleam with paint and oil. Strung around them are scalps of boys as well as pirates, for these are the Pickaninny tribe, and not to be confused with the softer-hearted Delawares or the Hurons. In the van, on all fours, is the great big little panther, a brave of so many scalps that in his present position they somewhat impede his progress. Bringing up the rear, the place of greatest danger, comes Tiger Lily, proudly erect, a princess in her own right. She is the most beautiful of dusky Dianas and the belle of the Pickaninnies, coquettish, cold, and amorous by turns. There is not a brave who would not have the wayward thing to wife, but she staves off the altar with a hatchet. Observe how they pass over fallen twigs without making the slightest noise. The only sound to be heard is their somewhat heavy breathing. The fact that they are a little fat now, just after all the heavy gorges, but in time, they will work this off. For the moment, however, it constitutes their chief danger. The redskins disappear as they have come like shadows, and soon their place is taken by the beasts, a great and motley procession, lions, tigers, bears, and the innumerable smaller savage things that flee from them, for every kind of beast, and more particularly all the man-eaters, live cheek by jowl on the favored island. Their tongues are hanging out, they are hungry tonight. When they have passed, comes the last figure of all, a gigantic crocodile. We shall see for whom she is looking presently. The crocodile passes, but soon the boys appear again, for the procession must continue indefinitely until one of the parties stops or changes its pace. Then quickly they will be on top of each other. All are keeping a sharp lookout in front, but none suspects that the danger may be creeping up from behind. This shows how real the island was. The first to fall out of the moving circle was the boys. They flung themselves down on the sward close to their underground home. I do wish Peter would come back. Every one of them said nervously, though in height and still more in breadth, they were all larger than their captain. I am the only one who is not afraid of the pirates, Slightly said, in a tone that prevented him from being a general favorite. But perhaps some distant sound disturbed him, for he added hastily, but I wish he would come back and tell us whether he has heard anything more about Cinderella. They talked of Cinderella, and Toodles was confident that his mother must have been very like her. It was only in Peter's absence that they could speak of mothers, the subject being forbidden by him as silly. All I remember about my mother, Nibs told them, is that she often said to Father, "Oh, how I wish I had a checkbook of my own. I don't know what a checkbook is, but I should just love to give my mother one." While they talked, they heard a distant sound. You or I, not being the wild things of the woods, would not have heard anything, but they heard it, and it was the grim song. Yo ho, the pirate life, the flag of skull and bones, a merry hour, a hempen rope, and hey for Davy Jones. At once the lost boys, but where are they? They are no longer there. Rabbits could not have disappeared more quickly. I will tell you where they are. With the exception of Nibs, who has darted away to reconnoiter, they are already in their home under the ground, a very delightful residence of which we shall see a good deal presently. But how have they reached it? For there is no entrance to be seen, not so much as a large stone, which if rolled away would disclose the mouth of a cave. Look closely, however, and you may note that there are 7 large trees, each with a hole in its hollow trunk as large as a boy. These are the 7 entrances to the home under the ground, for which Hook has been searching in vain these many moons. Will he find it tonight? As the pirates advanced, the quick eye of Starkey sighted Nibs disappearing through the wood, and at once his pistol flashed out, but an iron claw gripped his shoulder. Captain, let go, he cried, writhing. Now for the first time we hear the voice of Hook. It was a black voice. Put back that pistol, it said threateningly. It was one of those boys you hate. I could have shot him dead. Aye, and the sound would have brought upon Tiger Lily's redskins. Do you want to lose your scalp? Shall I after him, Captain? Asked pathetic Smee, and tickle him with Johnny Corkscrew? Smee had pleasant names for everything, and his cutlass was Johnny Corkscrew because he wriggled it in the wound. One could mention many lovable traits in Smee. For instance, after killing, it was his spectacles he wiped instead of his weapon. Johnny's a silent fellow, he reminded Hook. Not now, Smee, Hook said darkly. He is only one, and I want mischief of all the 7. Scatter and look for them. The pirates disappeared among the trees, and in a moment their captain and Smee were alone. Hook heaved a heavy sigh, and I know not why it was. Perhaps it was because of the soft beauty of the evening. But there came over him a desire to confide to his faithful boatswain the story of his life. He spoke long and earnestly, but what it was all about, Smee, who was rather stupid, did not know in the least. Anon he caught the word Peter. Most of all, Hook was saying passionately, I want their captain, Peter Pan. 'Twas he cut off my arm. He brandished the hook threateningly. I've waited long to shake his hand, but this, oh, I'll tear him. And yet, said Smee, I have often heard you say that the hook is worth a score of hands for combing the hair and other homely uses. Aye, the captain answered, if I was a mother, I would pray to have my children born with this instead of that. And he cast a look of pride upon his iron hand and one of scorn upon the other. Then again he frowned. Peter flung my arm, he said, wincing, to a crocodile that happened to be passing by. I have often, said Smee, noticed your strange dread of crocodiles. Not crocodiles, Hook corrected him, but of that one crocodile. He lowered his voice. It likes my arm so much, Smee, that it has followed me ever since, from sea to sea and from land to land, licking its lips for the rest of me. In a way, said Smee, it is a sort of compliment. I want no such compliments, Hook barked petulantly. I want Peter Pan, who first gave the brute its taste for me. He sat down on a large mushroom, and now there was a quiver in his voice. Smee, he said huskily, that crocodile would have had me before this, but by lucky chance it swallowed a clock which goes tick, tick inside it, and so before it can reach me, I hear the tick and bolt. He laughed, but in a hollow way. Someday, said Smee, the clock will run down and then he'll get you. Hook wetted his dry lips. Aye, he said, that's the fear that haunts me. Since sitting down, he had felt curiously warm. Smee, he said, this seat is hot. He jumped up. Odds bobs, hammers and tongs, I'm burning. They examined the mushroom, which was of a size and solidity unknown on the mainland. They tried to pull it up, and it came away at once in their hands, for it had no root. Stranger still, smoke began at once to ascend. The pirates looked at each other. A chimney, they both exclaimed. They had indeed discovered the chimney of the home under the ground. It was the custom of the boys to stop it with a mushroom when enemies were in their neighborhood. Now, not only smoke came out of it, there came also children's voices, for so safe did the boys feel in their hiding place that they were gaily chattering. The pirates listened grimly and then replaced the mushroom. They looked around them and noted the holes in the 7 trees. Did you hear them say Peter Pan's from home? Smee whispered, fidgeting with Johnny Corkscrew. Hook nodded. He stood for a long time, lost in thought, and at last a curdling smile lit up his swarthy face. Smee had been waiting for it. Unrip your plan, Captain, he cried eagerly. To return to the ship, Hook replied slowly through his teeth, and cook a large, rich cake of a jolly thickness with green sugar on it. There can be but one room below, for there is but one chimney. The silly moles had not the sense to see that they did not need a door apiece. That shows they have no mother. We will leave the cake on the shore of the mermaids' lagoon. Those boys are always swimming about there, playing with the mermaids. They will find the cake and they will gobble it up because, having no mother, they don't know how dangerous 'tis to eat a rich damp cake. He burst into laughter, not hollow laughter now, but honest laughter. Aha, they will die. Smee had listened with growing admiration. It's the wickedest, prettiest policy I ever heard of, he cried, and in their exultation they danced and sang. Avast belay when I appear, by fear you're overtook, not left with your bones when you have shaken claws with cook. They began the verse, but they never finished it, for another sound broke in and stilled them. It was at first such a tiny sound that a leaf might have fallen on it and smothered it, but as it came nearer, it was more distinct. Tick, 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 tick. Hook stood shuddering, one foot in the air. The crocodile, he gasped and bounded away, followed by his bosun. It was indeed the crocodile. It had passed the redskins, who were now on the trail of the other pirates. It oozed on after Hook. Once more the boys emerged into the open, but the dangers of the night were not yet over, for presently Nibs brushed breathless into their midst, pursued by a pack of wolves. The tongues of the pursuers were hanging out. The baying of them was terrible. Save me, cried Nibs, falling on the ground. But what can we do? What can we do? It was a high compliment to Peter that at that dire moment their thoughts turned to him. What would Peter do? They cried simultaneously. Almost in the same breath, they cried, Peter would look through his legs. And then, let us do what Peter would do. It is quite the most successful way of defying wolves, and as one boy they bent and looked through their legs. The next moment is the long one, but victory came quickly, for as the boys advanced upon them in this terrible attitude, the wolves dropped their tails and fled. Now Nibs rose from the ground, and the others thought that his staring eyes still saw the wolves. But it was not the wolves he saw. I have seen a wonderfuler thing, he cried, and they gathered round him eagerly. A great white bird. It is flying this way. What kind of bird do you think? I don't know, Nibs said, awestruck, but it looks so weary, and as it flies, it moans, Poor Wendy. Poor Wendy? I remember, said Slightly instantly. There are birds called Wendies. See, it comes, cried Curly, pointing to Wendy in the heavens. Wendy was now almost overhead, and they could hear her plaintive cry, but more distinct came the shrill voice of Tinker Bell. The jealous fairy had now cast off all disguise of friendship and was darting at her victim from every direction, pinching savagely each time she touched. Hello, Tink, she cried the wondering boys. Tink's reply rang out, Peter wants you to shoot the Wendy. It was not in their nature to question what Peter ordered. Let us do what Peter wishes, cried the simple boys. Quick, bows and arrows. All but Toodles popped down our trees. He had a bow and arrow with him, and Tink noted it and rubbed her little hands. Quick, Toodles, quick, she screamed. Peter will be so pleased. Toodles excitedly fitted the arrow to his bow. Out of the way, Tink, he shouted, and then he fired, and Wendy fluttered to the ground with an arrow in her breast. That's the end of chapter 5. Next, we'll read chapter 6. Chapter 6 is called The Little House. Foolish Toodles was standing like a conqueror over Wendy's body when the other boys sprang armed from their trees. You're too late, he cried proudly. I have shot the Wendy. Peter will be so pleased with me. Overheard, Tinkerbell shouted, silly ass, and darted into hiding. The others did not hear her. They had crowded round Wendy, and as they looked, a terrible silence fell upon the wood. If Wendy's heart had been beating, they would all have heard it. Slightly was the first to speak. This is no bird, he said in a scared voice. I think it must be a lady. A lady, said Toodles, and fell a trembling. And we have killed her, Nibs said hoarsely. They all whipped off their caps. Now I see, Curly said. Peter was bringing her to us. He threw himself sorrowfully on the ground. A lady to take care of us at last, said one of the twins. You have killed her. They were sorry for him, but sorrier for themselves. When he took a step nearer them, they turned from him. Toodles' face was very white, but there was a dignity about him now that had never been there before. I did it, he said, reflecting. When ladies used to come to me in dreams, I said, pretty mother, pretty mother. But when at last she really came, I shot her. He moved slowly away. Don't go, they cried in pity. I must, he answered, shaking. I am so afraid of Peter. It was at this tragic moment that they heard a sound which made the heart of every one of them rise to his mouth. They heard Peter crow. Peter, they cried, for it was always thus that he signaled his return. Hide her, they whispered and gathered hastily round Wendy, but Toodles stood aloof. Again came that ringing crow, and Peter dropped in front of them. Greetings, boys, he cried, and mechanically they saluted, and then again was silence. He frowned. I am back, he said hotly. Why do you not cheer? They opened their mouths, but the cheers would not come. He overlooked it in his haste to tell the glorious tidings. Great news, boys, he cried. I have brought at last a mother for you all. Still no sound except a little thud from Toodles as he dropped on his knees. Have you not seen her? Said Peter, becoming troubled. She flew this way. Ah, me, said one voice, and another said, oh, mournful day. Toodles rose. Peter, he said quietly, I will show her to you. And when the others would still have hidden her, he said, back, twins, let Peter see. So they all stood back and let them see, and after he had looked a little time, he did not know what to do next. She is dead, he said uncomfortably. Perhaps she is frightened at being dead. He thought of hopping off in a comic sort of way till he was out of sight of her and then never going near the spot anymore. They would all have been glad to follow if he had done this, but there was the arrow. He took it from her heart and faced his band. Whose arrow? He demanded sternly. Mine, Peter, said Toodles on his knees. Oh, dastard hand, Peter said, and he raised the arrow to use it as a dagger. Toodles did not flinch. He bared his breast. Strike, Peter, he said firmly. Strike true. Twice Peter did raise the arrow, and twice did his hand fall. I cannot strike, he said with awe. There is something that stays my hand. All looked at him in wonder, save Nibs, who fortunately looked at Wendy. It is she, he cried. The Wendy lady. See her arm? Wonderful to relate, Wendy had raised her arm. Nibs bent over her and listened reverently. I think she said, poor Toodles, he whispered. She lives, Peter said briefly. Slightly, they cried instantly, the Wendy lady lives. Then Peter knelt beside her and found his button. He remembered she had put it on a chain that she wore around her neck. See, he said, the arrow struck against this. It is the kiss I gave her. It has saved her life. I remember kisses, Slightly interposed quickly. Let me see it. Aye, that's a kiss. Peter did not hear him. He was begging Wendy to get better quickly so that he could show her the mermaids. Of course, she could not answer yet, being still in a frightful faint, but from overhead came a wailing note. Listen to Tink, said Curly. She is crying because the Wendy lives. Then they had to tell Peter of Tink's crime. And almost never had they seen him look so stern. "Listen, Tinker Bell," he said, "I am your friend no more. Begone from me forever." She flew on to his shoulder and pleaded, but he brushed her off. Not until Wendy again raised her arm did he relent sufficiently to say, "Well, not forever, but for a whole week." Do you think Tinker Bell was grateful to Wendy for raising her arm? Oh dear, no. Never wanted to pinch her so much. Fairies indeed are strange, and Peter, who understood them best, often cuffed them. But what to do with Wendy in her present delicate state of health? "Let us carry her down into the house," Curly suggested. "I," said Slightly, "that is what one does with ladies." "No, no," Peter said, "you must not touch her. It would not be sufficiently respectful." "That," said Slightly, "is what I was thinking." "But if she lies there," Toodle said, "she will die." "Aye, she will die," Slightly admitted, "but there is no way out." "Yes, there is," cried Peter. "Let's build a little house around her." They were all delighted. "Quick," he ordered them, "bring me each of you the best of what we have. Gut our house, be sharp." In a moment, they were busy as tailors the night before a wedding. They scurried this way and that, looking down for bedding and up for firewood, and while they were at it, who should appear but John and Michael? As they dragged along the ground, they fell asleep standing, stopped, woke up, moved another step, and slept again. "John, John," Michael would cry, "wake up! Where's Nana, John, and Mother?" And then John would rub his eyes and mutter, "It is true, we did fly." You may be sure they were very relieved to find Peter. "Hello, Peter," they said. "Hello," Peter replied amicably, though he had quite forgotten them. He was very busy at the moment measuring Wendy with his feet to see how large a house she would need. Of course, she meant to leave room for chairs and a table. John and Michael watched him. "Is Wendy asleep?" they asked. "Yes." "John," Michael proposed, "let us wake her and get her to make supper for us." And as he said it, some of the other boys rushed on, carrying the branches for building of the house. "Look at them," he cried. "Curly," said Peter in his most captainy voice, "see that these boys help in the building of the house." "Aye, aye, sir." "Build a house?" exclaimed John. "For the Wendy," said Curly. "For Wendy?" John said aghast. "Why, she is only a girl." "That," explained Curly, "is why we are her servants." "You, Wendy's servants?" "Yes," said Peter, "and you also. Away with them." The astounded brothers were dragged away to hack and hew and carry. "Chairs and a fender first," Peter ordered. "Then we shall build the house round them." "Aye," said Slightly, "that is how a house is built, and all comes back to me." Peter had thought of everything. "Slightly," he cried, "fetch a doctor." "Aye, aye," said Slightly at once, and disappeared, scratching his head. But he knew Peter must be obeyed. And he returned in a moment, wearing John's hat and looking solemn. "Please, sir," said Peter, going to him, "are you a doctor?" The difference between him and the other boys at such a time was that they knew it was make-believe, while to him, make-believe was true and were exactly the same thing. This sometimes troubled them, as when they had to make believe they had had their dinners. If they broke down in their make-believe, he rapped them on the knuckles. "Yes, my little man," anxiously replied Slightly, who had chapped knuckles. "Please, sir," Peter explained, "a lady lies very still and very ill." She was lying at their feet, but Slightly had the sense not to see her. "Tut, tut, tut," he replied. "Where does she lay?" "In yonder glade." "I will put a glass thing in her mouth," said Slightly, and he made believe to do it while Peter waited. It was an anxious moment when the glass thing was withdrawn. "How is she?" inquired Peter. "Tut, tut, tut," said Slightly. "This has cured her." "I am glad," Peter cried. "I will call again in the evening," Slightly said. "Give her beef tea out of a cup with a spout to it." But after he had returned the hat to John, he blew big breaths, which was his habit on escaping from a difficulty. In the meantime, the wood had been alive with the sound of axes. Almost everything needed for a cozy dwelling already lay at Wendy's feet. "If only we knew," said one, "the kind of house she likes best." "Peter," shouted another, "she is moving in her sleep." "Her mouth opens," cried a third, looking respectfully into it. "Oh, lovely." "Perhaps she is going to sing in her sleep," said Peter. "Wendy, sing the kind of house you would like to have." Immediately, without opening her eyes, Wendy began to sing. "I wish I had a pretty house, the littlest ever seen, with funny little red walls and a roof of mossy green. They gurgled with joy at this, for by the greatest good luck, the branches they had brought were sticky with red sap, and all the ground was carpeted with moss. As they rattled up the little house, they broke into song themselves. We've built the little walls and roof and made a lovely door. So tell us, Mother Wendy, what are you wanting more? To this she answered rather greedily. Oh, really, next, I think I'll have gay windows all about, with roses peeping in, you know, and babies peeping out. With a blow of their fists, they made windows, and large yellow leaves were the blinds. But roses? Roses, cried Peter sternly. Quickly, they made believe to grow the loveliest roses up the walls. Babies? To prevent Peter ordering babies, they hurried into song again. We've made the roses peeping out, the babies are at the door. We can't make ourselves, you know, because we've been made before. Peter seemed, seeing this to be a good idea, at once pretended that it was his own. The house was quite beautiful, and no doubt Wendy was very cozy within, though of course they could no longer see her. Peter strode up and down, ordering finishing touches. Nothing escaped his eagle eye. Just when it seemed absolutely finished, there's no knocker on the door, he said. They were very ashamed, but Toodles gave the sole of his shoe, and it made an excellent knocker. Absolutely finished now, they thought. Not a bit of it. There's no chimney, Peter said. We must have a chimney. It certainly does need a chimney, said John importantly. This gave Peter an idea. He snatched the hat off John's head, knocked out the bottom, and put a hat on the roof. The little house was so pleased to have such a capital chimney that, as if to say thank you, smoke immediately began to come out of the hat. Now really and truly it was finished. Nothing remained to do but to knock. All look your best, Peter warned them. First impressions are awfully important. He was glad no one had asked him what first impressions are. They were all too busy looking their best. He knocked politely, and now the wood was as still as the children, not a sound to be heard except from Tinker Bell, who was watching from a branch and openly sneering. What the boys were wondering was, would anyone answer the knock? If a lady, what would she be like? The door opened and a lady came out. It was Wendy. They all whipped off their hats. She looked properly surprised, and this was just how they had hoped she would look. Where am I? She asked. Of course, Slightly was the first to get his word in. Wendy, lady, he said rapidly, for you we built this house. Oh, say you're pleased, cried Nibs. Lovely, darling house, Wendy said, and these were the very words they had hoped she would say. And we are your children, cried the twins. Then they all went on their knees, holding out their arms, cried, Oh, Wendy, lady, be our mother. Ought I? Wendy said, all shining. Of course, it's frightfully fascinating, but you see, I am only a little girl. I have no real experience. That doesn't matter, said Peter, as if he were the only person present who knew all about it, though he was really the one who knew least. What we need is just a nice motherly person. Oh dear, Wendy said. You see, I feel that is exactly what I am. It is, they all cried. We saw it at once. Very well, she said, I will do my best. Come inside at once, you naughty children. I am sure your feet are damp. And before I put you to bed, I have just time to finish the story of Cinderella. In they went. I don't know how there was room for them, but you can squeeze very tight in the Neverland. And that was the first of many joyous evenings they had with Wendy. By and by, she tucked them up in the great bed in the home under the trees, but she herself slept that night in the little house, and Peter kept watch with the drawn sword, for the pirates could be heard carousing far away, and the wolves were on the prowl. The little house looked so cozy and safe in the darkness, and with a bright light shining through its blinds, and the chimney smoking beautifully, and Peter standing on guard. After a time, he fell asleep, and some unsteady fairies had to climb over them on their way home. There's Peter in the little house, in the chimney with John's hat, and you see the wolves on the prowl, and some fairies, and the title of the picture is Peter on Guard. Any of the other boys would be obstructing the fairy path that night. They would have mischiefed, for they had just tweaked Peter's nose and passed by. That's the end of chapter 6. Join me again next time. We'll pick up right where we left off, chapter 7, which is called The Home Under the Ground. Take care, friends. Bye-bye.